Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
We're going to be talking about creating formulas with Lambda. And Lambda may or may not be something that you've heard of. It's quite a lot of buzz about Lambda at the moment. You see it if you spend any amount of time on LinkedIn. People are always talking about Lambdas. And if you've never used them before, then they're probably a little bit of a mystery, but hopefully we're going to demystify them for you, because Lambdas, particularly for more advanced Excel users, are pretty much a game changer when it comes to working with formulas in Excel. And those are a couple of things I would point out at the beginning. Lambdas are only available in Microsoft 365. So that's 365 for PC and also for Mac, and also Excel for the web. So if you're using an older version, the Microsoft 365, then unfortunately you're not going to have the Lambda function. So you need to know that up front. Everything we are going to be using is only available in Microsoft 365. My name's Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft MVP, course creator, content creator, all of that good stuff. I've been training Microsoft for over 25 years now, which makes me feel extremely old, and I'm going to be your host. So we're going to start out with really taking it back to first principles, because I don't like to assume that you know anything when we're going through any of these formulas. So we're going to start out by talking about the concept of variables, because variables is probably the most important concept to understand when you're working with Lambda. And really, to illustrate the concept of variables, I'm actually going to introduce you to Lambda via another formula called let. And let is another one of the newer formulas available in Excel. Again, it's just Excel 365, which works with variables, and it's just a nice lead-in to working with Lambda. We're then going to dive into Lambda. I'm going to show you a simple one, like how you can put it together. And then I'm going to show you how you can create your own function. So that's the exciting part of Lambdas. You know, we're all used to using functions in Excel, so sum, count, average, all of those kinds of things. We can now, using Lambda, actually create our own formulas and functions, which is really exciting and opens up a world of possibilities. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you how you can reuse the function. I'm going to show you two other examples of practical uses of lambdas, and then I'm just going to end by talking about a question that comes up often when we're talking about lambdas, is how you can share them with others, how you can copy them to other spreadsheets, things like that. But the main concept that you need to get your head around when you're working with lambdas is this concept of variables. Now, you might be very familiar with variables and how they work. I'm going to assume that you know nothing about variables. Now, variables are basically just a way of naming a value in a cell or a range of cells. So the way that I would liken variables in this particular context is to something like named ranges. You might be familiar with selecting a range of cells and then giving them a name via the Formulas tab in the Name Manager. That might be a concept you're already aware of. Variables are kind of similar to that. So let's do something really basic first of all, just so that you really understand what I'm talking about. Now here, I just have three numbers. I have 10, I have 6, and I have 2. And maybe I want to do just a very basic calculation. So let's just do sum. And we're going to say B6, so 10 in this case, plus B7. And we'll just divide it by B8. So I'm just basically doing there 10 plus 6 divided by 2. So I would expect the answer to be 8, which it is. Now, in this particular formula, if you take a look up in the formula bar, I'm using cell references. This is a fairly standard concept when we're working with formulas. Now, what I could do instead is I could set all of these cell references up as variables, effectively give them a name, and then I can use the name in the formula instead. So what I could do here is I could say that I want to give this cell here that contains the number 10 a name, this cell a name, and this cell a name as well. Now, the way that I could do that is by using the let function. So I'm going to type in let. Now, notice here with let, we have basically three arguments. So we have name1, name value1, and then calculation or name2. So what we're essentially doing here is we're setting up a name and then we're giving that name a value. And then we can choose if we want to set up another name or if we want to perform a calculation. So let's start out by just naming our numbers that we have in here. So what I could say here, and you can name your numbers whatever you like, I'm just going to call mine X. So that's the first name, comma, I'm going to type in 10 and assign that to X. So effectively, I'm giving the value 10 a name of X. Okay, so very similar to named ranges, comma. I can carry on going. So I could do another name for the next number. So I could say Y, comma, and that's going to be assigned to the value 6. And then finally, I could say that I want to assign the letter Z to the value 2. Now, as I said, these don't have to be single characters. You could give them actual text names, which we're going to do in an example a little bit later on. But this is the concept. You're effectively creating what we call variable pairs. So you have the name and then you have the value, the name and then the value. And you can carry on going. You can have 127 different pairs in your let formula. Now, once you've finished defining your name and the value assigned to that name, you can then do a calculation. So let's do that same calculation that we did before, but this time we're going to use the variable names as opposed to the actual cell references or the values. So if you remember from before, we did sum, open bracket, and then we did effectively 10 plus 6. So this time I'm just going to do X plus Y, close the bracket, and then we divided by 2 effectively, which in this case is Z, close bracket. There we go. We should still get the same thing, but we've got our variables in use instead of the actual cell references or the actual numbers. You might be looking at that thinking, well, why on earth would I ever want to do that? That is so much longer than just typing in sum and selecting the cell ranges. I would agree in this example, because this is a very basic example, then it is just quicker to do sum. The way that let comes into play is it's very lightweight. And also, if you have a very long complex formula, which when you start getting into the more advanced formulas in Excel, your formulas can end up being pretty long. A lot of the time you'll find that you're reusing maybe the same cell references over and over again throughout your formula. That is when let becomes particularly useful, because you can effectively define a cell or a range at the beginning here and then just reuse the name over and over again in the formula instead of selecting the entire cell range. So it helps when you've got sort of longer formulas with lots of duplicate cell references in there. It's useful to use a let. The thing with let as well is it's very lightweight, so it makes your spreadsheets really, really efficient. Excel can calculate these really, really quickly, so it helps if you're ever worried about performance, lag, things like that. These are really nice and efficient. Now, lambdas, how do they differ from let, and what exactly are they? Well, lambdas are reasonably similar. It's this sort of concept, but we can go a stage further when it comes to lambdas, because what we can do is we can actually create all of our own formulas. And the way that we do that is that we create our lambda formula and then we effectively save it as a named range. And that will allow us to create our own formula. So when we go into the name manager, we should be able to see it listed in here. So let's backtrack a little and go to the next worksheet. Again, I'm going to start off really, really simple. And I've only got 3 examples here. And then you can go away and you can start to practice these yourself. So what do we have here on this second spreadsheet? Well, in column B, we have a list of sales prices. And in cell C4, we have a sales tax amount, which is 20%. Now, all I want to do here is I want to do a basic calculation which works out the price with the tax added onto the top. So we need to work out what 20% is of 10, for example, of this first one, and then we want to add it all together. So we can very easily do that in our heads. I'm expecting $12 to be in here. Now, if we were just doing this using Excel formulas, then again, this is pretty straightforward. We can simply do a sum, and then we want to do B7 multiplied by the tax amount. And remember, because we're going to copy this formula down, we don't want that cell to move when we pull the formula down. So we need to lock it by pressing F5. C4. Now, if I was just to hit enter there, it's just going to give me 20% of 10. I actually want it to include the sales price, so I just want to plus the sales price on top just there. Now, there are various different ways you can do this calculation, but this is the way that we're going to do it. Let's hit enter, and we get a result of 12. I can then double click to copy that down, and I have all of my answers. Now, if we take a look at this formula up in the formula bar, what are we using there? Well, in that entire formula, I'm basically using two cell references. I'm using B7, that's repeated twice in the formula, and I'm using the cell C4. Now, what I could do here is very similar to let, is I could use lambda to effectively replace these cell references with variables. So let's do that first of all. So I'm going to click in here, and we're going to use lambda. Now, the difference between lambda and let is, if you remember, with let, we typed in x, comma, 10. So we basically defined the name, and then we assigned the value. Now, the difference with lambda is that we define all of our variables up front, first of all. So we don't assign the number to the variable. So what I would do here is, if we remember this calculation we want to do, this sum, we're using two cell references. The first one is cell B7. So I can give cell B7 a name. I'm going to call it price, comma. Now, instead of actually telling Excel that price is assigned to cell B7 or $10, I'm going to go straight into my next variable, declaring that next variable. Because the next cell reference that we use in that formula is cell C4, where we specified the tax amount. And I'm going to give that a name of tax. So I'm declaring both of my variables, which I'm going to assign to cells, up front, first of all. Okay. And then I'm going to do my calculation. So this is the same calculation. We're going to do sum. We're going to open bracket. And if we remember, the calculation from before was we did cell B7 multiplied by cell C4. Now, this time, cell B7 is called price. So I can do price multiplied, and cell C4 is called tax. So we want to multiply it by tax, like so. And then we need to do a plus, and we want to add the price onto the end. So that's exactly the same calculation, but we're using the names as opposed to the cell references or the values. Now, if I was to close this off like that and hit enter, I'm going to get a calc error. And you will see this come up from time to time when you're using the lambda formula. And that's because we haven't actually told this formula what cells these names refer to. So if you take a look at this, I'm just declaring price and tax, but Excel doesn't actually know which cells price and tax refer to, because unlike let, where we define this up front, in lambda, we don't. What we have to do here is go to the end of the formula, open a bracket, and then we tell the formula which cells price refers to and which cells tax refers to. So price refers to cell B7, comma, and tax refers to cell C4, and I want to lock that. So your input cells, what we call the input cells, are in brackets at the end. You declare the names at the front, and then you define what cells they refer to at the end. So now when I hit enter, we should find that we get exactly the same result if we copy this down using this lambda instead. You might be looking at this thinking, well, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, this is where we can actually turn this into a function and then use it on other data. So if I wanted to maybe use this type of formula on different worksheets or different workbooks that I have, instead of having to go through this process, I would just create my own little function to do this. So let me show you this, because this is pretty cool. Now, when you're setting up your own function, as I mentioned, you need to define it in the name manager. So this is effectively like setting up a named range. Now, we have the lambda formula in here. What we need to do is we need to copy it. Now, notice here, I'm just selecting the first part. I'm not actually selecting the input cells at the end. Now, the reason why I'm not selecting those is because this is going to be a formula that we could use on any data set. And the input cells are going to change depending on what data set we're using it and where that data is actually located in the worksheet. So we don't need those last two, we just need the actual lambda formula. So Control C to copy. And we're going to go into the name manager and we're going to create ourselves a formula. So if we click on the new button just here, at the bottom, I'm going to paste my formula in. Control V. There is my lambda. And now I can give my formula a name. Now, what is this actually calculating? It's calculating sales tax. So we'll just call it sales tax. Again, you can call your formulas whatever you like so, and click on OK. So now what I've effectively done is I've created myself my own formula. So if I click in here and start to type in sales tax, can you see now if I press tab, it's coming up like it's an inbuilt formula in Excel. And the arguments you can see there, price and tax, those are the variables that we defined in that lambda formula. So I can then use this and I can simply go in and I can select the sales price just here, comma, and then the tax amount, close the bracket, hit enter, and the calculation is correct. Okay, so a really nice way of creating your own formulas. And you should be able to sort of see, I know people who use Lambda all the time and they just have pages and pages of all of these formulas that they've created to do things that they either find very difficult to do in Excel, things that take a long time or are quite complex, they want a more simple way of doing it, or just really so they can widen the things that they can do when they're working in Excel. There's always things that sometimes you're maybe working with the data set and you think to yourself, oh, I wish I could do that, or I wish it could do this. And one that springs to mind is one that's come up quite often recently, and that is counting cells based on the background fill color of the cell. That's not something you can do easily in Excel. And a lot of people set up their own Lambda to do things like that, so more complex things. So that's just a side note as to sort of some of the ways that you might want to think about using these. Now here we have, again, a very small data set. We have some names in a list. We have the salaries. Let's just say these are employees. We have their salary. We have the department that they work in, and then we have the region. So what I might want to do here is maybe sort this list over here in columns I to J. So I'm going to use, again, some functions that are only available in Excel 365. I'm going to use the sort by function. Now, there are two sort of ways that you can sort using functions in Excel 365. You could use the sort function or you could use sort by. If I click over here, you can see we have one called sort, where we have these arguments, and then we have another one called sort by. And these differ very slightly, but with sort, it only allows you really to sort by one column, whereas sort by, you can sort by multiple columns. So that's what we're going to do in this example. We're going to do a sort by. Now, the first argument of sort by is to select the array that we want to sort. Now, I want to sort this entire array. So everything you see in this table, I want to sort. So I'm going to select the entire array, B4 to E17, comma. It then asks me by array 1. So what's the first column that I want to sort by? So let's say that I want to sort by the region column. I need to select the region column just here, so E4 to E17. It's worth noting I don't have my data in a table, which is why you're not seeing table references, you're seeing the cell references instead, comma. I can now define if I want to sort in ascending or descending order. So how do I want to sort this? So I'm sorting by region. Do I want it A to Z or Z to A? I think it's descending, so we're going to do a -1, comma. And then what we could do is then choose another column to sort by. So this is very similar to when you're doing a custom sort, saying sort by this column and then this column. That's what by array 2 means. So I could say, okay, once we've sorted in descending order by the region column, I want to sort the department, comma, and then you can choose if you want to sort in ascending or descending. Now, it doesn't actually tell you, it doesn't pop up with ascending or descending for array 2, so you kind of have to remember. So let's say ascending. I'm going to add a 1 in there. Now, I could carry on going, but I'm going to leave it at that at this stage. So let's close the bracket and hit enter. And this is what I would expect to see. It's now taken that array of data and it's now sorted those results. And it's sorted them in the order that I specified. So it's sorted them by the region column first of all in descending order, and then by the department column in ascending order. Okay, so we've got our nice sorted list. Now, of course, this could be a much more complex formula. This is reasonably short. I'm just trying to keep things quite nice and simple so that lambda is easier for you to understand. But this could be a much longer formula. But let's just say that we want to create or turn this into our own custom sort formula, which we can then go and use on other data in our worksheet. This is where we can turn it into a lambda. So once again, if we click up in the formula bar, we can type in lambda, like so, and then we can define our variables again. And remember, with the lambda, we define them all up front. So if we take a look at the sort by formula, you can see that we have 3 cell ranges in there: B4 to E17, E4 to E17, and D4 to D17. Now, the first one, B4 to E17, that's when we selected the entire array, the entire table of data, effectively. So I'm going to call this RNG for range, comma. E4 to E17 refers to that region column of data. You can see in the formula it's highlighted in red, and in the table we've got the red outline around region. So I could call this reg, or I could call it region. If I wanted to make it really obvious, let's just call it region, comma. And then the third cell range is D4 to D17, which represents the department. So I'm going to call that dept. Okay, so once again, I'm declaring my variables right up front. I'm not assigning anything to them at the moment. I'm just declaring them. So now that I have those, I can go into my formula and I can replace all of these cell references with these meaningful names. This is another reason why Lambda can be quite good, because sometimes a name is more meaningful to people than just cell ranges in here. So I can replace B4 to E17 with RNG. Let's replace E4 to E17 with region. And then let's replace D4 to D17 with dept. Let's click at the end. So I'm going to close off my Lambda. And remember, if we don't define what cells those names refer to, we're going to get a calc error. So we need to make sure we open our bracket and then let Excel know what cell ranges or what cells these names refer to. So RNG, which is range, that refers to this range of cells just here. Region refers to this range, and dept refers to this range just here. Okay, so these are kind of like your inputs into the formula. Now, when we hit enter, we should find that there is no change because it's doing exactly the same thing. We've just set this up as a lambda. And once again, once we've done this, we can then copy the first part of the formula and create our own function. So once again, we want to copy everything except those input cells in brackets at the end. Control C. We can go to Name Manager. We can create a new name, and I'm going to paste my lambda into here, and then you can call your formula whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to call it custom sort. Click on OK and close. So now technically I should be able to use that not only on this data but also on this data down here. So if I delete out the big lambda formula, I could now say, okay, I want to use my new formula, custom sorts. Check it out. We have the arguments which we created variables for: range, region, and department. And it makes it really easy for me to know what I need to select. So we're going to say range for the first argument, then I need to select region, and then department. Close the bracket, hit enter, and we get our result. Okay, so really nice and simple. Hopefully you can see how this might be useful if you have very complex formulas. You want to simplify them down and make them easy for everybody to use. Now, one thing you do have to be careful of is being a bit too specific when you're creating your formulas. So let me show you what I mean. If I want to reuse the custom sort formula that I've just created on a slightly different data set. Now, it's not that different, but it has different column headings. So if I want to now say custom sort this list, range, that's fine. I can select range just here, comma, region, that's fine. I've got a region column. I could do that, comma, depth. Now, looking at my data, or this particular data, I don't have a department column. So this sort of doesn't make sense. And that's because I've been very specific in how I've named these, and these kind of really only relate to the table above. So what I would make sure you do, particularly when you're creating these lambdas, is make these a little bit more generic if you want people to be able to use them on other types of data, because they're not necessarily going to have exactly the same column headings, for example. So if we go back, well, what I'm going to do is, just to show you how this works, is instead of having region and department and being very specific, range is fine because that could refer to any range. I'm going to change these just to sort 1 and sort 2 so that people can just use them on any data and it's not going to be confusing. So now that I've changed those, I need to make sure that I change them in here as well. Let's do sort 2. And I need to update the actual formula, so I need to copy this again, Control C, and I need to update it in the name manager so that we have the correct thing in there. So I want to make sure that we Control V over the top, click on OK, and close. And now, when I use this on another data set, we should find that that is a little bit more useful as opposed to having very specific arguments. So now I can select the range, sort 1, and I can choose any column to sort by. And it's going to do either the ascending or descending. Whatever I specified in the lambda, how I want it to be sorted, that's what it's going to do. You can see here we don't actually have to specify if we want to sort in ascending or descending because we've already defined that. So my sort 1, let's just say location, sort 2 might be region, close the bracket, hit enter, and there we have our sort. This one's pretty cool as well. So here we're going to do something a little bit more practical. So we're going to create another formula using Lambda. This formula is going to be to do something completely different. So this time we're going to create a formula to extract some text. So you can see here we have a list of invoices. And what I'm trying to do in this first example is I want to extract the client name from this invoice. And the client name is this thing in the middle. So for the first one, it's Gramazon. For the next one, it's Samsung. You can probably see where I was going with these company names. The third one is Lemon. The next one is Oracle. Then we have Microhard and then Gaggle. So I want to just have in column C, Gramazon, Samsung, Lemon, Oracle, so on and so forth. Now, we do have functions that can help us extract text out. In older versions of Excel, we would use things like left, right, and mid to extract text from a string. But in 365, we have two of probably my favorite functions ever, and that is text before and text after. And these two functions just really simplified the process of extracting text, because the process of extracting text is really simple if everything is consistent in your data. When it's not, using left, right, and mid can get really, really complex. And unfortunately, when they introduced text after and text before, it became a lot simpler. So you can see here we have that kind of situation. Because I want to extract Gramazon, Samsung, Lemon, Oracle, these are all different length words. So I need to use text before and text after in order to do this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is going to type in equals. We're going to say text before. And if you've never used these, this is a nice little introduction as well, because these are pretty cool. Now, the text, we just need to specify which cell the text is located in, which is cell B5. And then we can basically say, extract all the text before a specific delimiter. Now, if I'm extracting, in this first example, Gramazon, I could say extract all the text before the second dash. So the dash is my delimiter. So I want to put that in quote marks. And then I can choose the instance number. Now, because I've got two dashes in here, I want to say extract everything before the second dash. Now, when I close the bracket here, it's going to give me that INV Gramazon. And if I was to copy that down, it's going to give me INV Samsung, INV Lemon. Let's do that so you can see that that is in fact working. So I'm getting there, but I need to remove INV off the front. So this is where we can combine it with text after, because I can add text after on the beginning here and say, then extract everything after the first delimiter. So if we type in text after at the beginning, like so, and our text is being generated by the text before, position number 1 is the default here. So we don't have to say what the instance number is. It will know that we want the first one. And then when we hit enter, we get exactly what we want. Now, if you're looking at that thinking, well, that's quite complicated, trust me, that is so much easier than having to struggle with left, right, and mid. Those can get really, really complicated. This is so much easier once you get the hang of it. Now, if you are finding that complicated or you can't remember, maybe if you put text before first or text after, maybe you're finding that really complicated, you could set this up as a lambda and just make your life really, really easy. So maybe I want to create a function and call it text mid, which will extract everything from the middle. I could do that using lambda. So let's do it. Let's jump up to the formula bar. I'm going to say lambda. Let's open a bracket. Now, what am I using in this formula? What do I need to define as my variables? Well, we're using a cell reference. We're using cell B5. So that's going to be our input cell, our cell or our range. So I could call that range or cell, or remember, you can call these whatever you want to call them. But another input that I have is the delimiter, so the dash. So I need to give the dash a name as well. So let's name cell B5. I'm just going to call that range again. And let's give our dash a name. Let's call it char1, character 1, and press comma. So now I can go into this formula and I can replace my cell references and my dashes with my two variables. So we want to replace B5 with RNG for range. And then we want to replace the dash with char1. And we have a dash twice in this formula, so we need to replace them both. So that's what the lambda is going to look like. Remember, we need to get to the end, close off our lambda, and then we need to define which cells our variables refer to. So in this case, range refers to cell B5 and char1 is a dash. Okay, let's hit enter. And again, we should find that nothing changes. We can copy that down and we still have the same thing. So now we can create our own function. Once again, we're going to select that first part. We're not going to select those input cells. Control C to copy. We can go to the name manager. I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to paste my lambda in, and then I can give my formula a name. And I'm going to call this text mid. And click on OK and close. So now, if I wanted to use that on this data set down here and extract the part code, which is, let's just say it's the middle 3 characters just here, I now have a function to do that, which is a lot simpler than using text before and text after. I can use text mid, I can select my range, you select your range or your cell, I'm just going to do a cell, and then we can specify the character. So because we're just saying char1, it doesn't have to be a dash, it can be anything, it can be any character. Here we have forward slashes instead of dashes. So my character is a forward slash. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to extract that part code out of the middle. And this always comes up whenever I'm training lambdas. And people always ask, okay, I've got all of these new formulas that I've set up in my workbook. Can I share them with other people? Can I copy them across workbooks? Because if I was to open up a brand new workbook, so let's just do that. If I create a blank workbook and go to the name manager, I don't have any of my formulas in there. So, I don't really want to have to go in and start creating all of them every time I'm using a workbook. That is not efficient at all. And this is a bit of an issue. We have raised this with Microsoft, having a much easier way of getting your lambdas to work across workbooks. But there are a couple of ways that you can get around it. The first one would be If you do have a lambda in a workbook and you want to use it in another one, all you need to do is copy a cell that contains the lambda. So here you can see this cell that I'm clicked on has the lambda formula underneath. If I was to copy that and paste it into a new workbook, it will automatically bring that formula into that workbook. So it will create the named range for you. So you just copy a cell into the workbook and it will bring it across. Another way that you could do it is if this was a workbook that you wanted to use all the time, you could save it as a template and create new workbooks off of that. And that would also contain your lambda.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.